12 апреля в Алма-Ате глава российского внешнеполитического ведомства примет участие в первом в этом году заседании Совета министров иностранных дел СНГ. Главы внешнеполитических ведомств обменяются мнениями по актуальным международным региональным проблемам, обсудят приоритетные направления интеграционного взаимодействия в формате Содружества в текущем году. Ну и, как ожидается, основное внимание будет уделено подготовке к празднованию в государствах-участниках Содружества 80-летия Победы в Великой Отечественной войне и другим вопросам культурно-гуманитарного сотрудничества, а также тематики укрепления пограничной безопасности. В тот же день министр иностранных дел России Сергей Лавров примет участие в 8-й встрече глав внешнеполитических ведомств России, государств Центральной Азии, Казахстана, Киргизии, Таджикистана, Туркменистана и Узбекистана. В ходе мероприятия планируется обсудить широкий круг наиболее актуальных для России и стран Центральной Азии вопросов политического, торгово-экономического, культурно-гуманитарного взаимодействия в шестистороннем формате. Предполагается обмен мнениями по ключевым международным проблемам под углом зрения координации шагов в целях их решений в интересах укрепления безопасности и стабильности в Центральноазиатском регионе. 12 апреля министр иностранных дел России Сергей Лавров посетит Турцию по приглашению министра иностранных дел Турецкой Республики для участия в 4-м Анталийском дипломатическом форуме. В ходе мероприятия запланировано выступление главы российского внешнеполитического ведомства и проведение двусторонних встреч с иностранными коллегами. Предполагается обсудить ключевые аспекты международной повестки дня, в том числе положение дел на Ближнем Востоке, Северной Африке, Закавказье, Черноморский регион, а также актуальные вопросы отношений с отдельными государствами. 14 апреля министр иностранных дел России Сергей Лавров примет участие в Москве в 3-й встрече национальных координаторов группы друзей в защиту Устава ООН. Объединение в составе 19 стран мирового большинства было создано, напомню, в 2021 году по инициативе Венесуэлы на фоне активизации попыток западников подвергнуть ревизии миропорядок, основанный на уставе Организации Объединенных Наций и других нормах международного права. В последние годы авторитет группы...
It has become an instrument to raise the voice of the global South and to oppose the one-sided approaches of the Western camp in order to create a just multipolar world order. In the context of the Moscow meeting of this group, there is intention to speak about the key issues of its agenda in order to eradicate colonialism in all its forms and manifestations. There also will be speaking about the regional situation, and they also speak about the prospects of making its geographical representation even wider. On the 15th of April, Minister of Foreign Affairs will participate in the exhibition Anniversary Year from Mexico to Argentina, because we're going to celebrate anniversaries of diplomatic relations with many countries. Argentina, 140 years, Mexico, 135 years, Colombia, 90 years, Bolivia, Venezuela, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, 80 years, Honduras, 35 years, and 65 years of restoring diplomatic relations with Cuba. Diplomatic corps accredited in Moscow, scientific and business circles and the media will be invited. Foreign Policy Archive of the Russian Federation will provide the necessary copies of the documents about the relations with the mentioned states, as well as the materials that demonstrate the development of multifaceted cooperation in politics, economy, culture, and humanitarian spheres. It will also be dedicated to the fight against fascism in the Latin America and the Caribbean countries. And organizers of the exhibition say that this exhibition will be imbued with the unique Latin American character and will do everything necessary that all the people could see the digital form of this exhibition. On the 16th of April, there will be the 44th Council of Heads of Entities of the Russian Federation presided by a foreign minister. There will be governors, representatives of the administration of the President of the Russian Federation and the federal organs of executive authorities. As you know, there are many citizens that want to come from the hostile countries to our country. This is being implemented in the context of the presidential decree on providing humanitarian support to people that share traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. They will be discussing the recommendations of information, legal, and organizational character to have a systemic work in this sphere. There will also be a report of the head of the Archangel region, Mr. Cybulski, presented, and the governor of the Amur region is going to speak about the creation in the city of Blagoveshchensk, a competent center for Russian-Chinese business cooperation at the federal level to coordinate bilateral interregional ties. Let's speak about the relevant international agenda. I'll answer all the issues that we have received. We have already commented on it. There were many issues about another round of Russian and U.S. Negotiations, consultations concerning the functioning of our diplomatic missions. They will be tomorrow. This will be the second round of Russian-U.S. consultations dedicated to normalizing the functioning of diplomatic missions of two countries. The place, the expert format, and the list of participants are not going to change. They will be in Istanbul. Alexander Darchev is going to be the head of Russian delegation, and the U.S. delegation will be headed by the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Senata Kota. There will also be representatives of the foreign policy departments of Russia and the U.S. They'll continue their detailed work in order to remove the various technical obstacles that make it difficult to work for the diplomats of both our countries. The situation around Ukraine. I would like to speak about the so-called arrangements which Kiev regime agreed to, but from the very first second it started it refused to implement it, despite the statements that were made to implement the 30-day moratorium for the against the shellings of energy facilities. Kiev regime continues to deal blow after blow against the energy infrastructure of Russia. At the same time, Russia strictly enforces the ban on attacks. Since the 4th to the 7th of April, Ukrainian armed forces attacked energy facilities in Russian regions 32 times. In particular, on the 4th of April, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked 5 energy facilities of Rosseti in Bryansk region, 4 facilities in Belgorod region, 1 facility in Voronezh, Lipetsk, and Kherson regions. The units of gas distribution plant Kremlin and LPR were also damaged. Wires are broken on a high-voltage line in Spalansky MPP Kalushka. On the 5th of April, AFU also broken the high-voltage line Ostrovskoye Kavylne of Kremenaga, damaged gas distribution pipelines in Voronezh region, 3 energy facilities of Rosseti in Bryansk and Rostov regions. On the 6th of April, 2 energy facilities of Rosseti in Rostov region were attacked, as well as 1 in Bryansk, Voronezh, and Kherson regions, a substation and DPR. As a result, thousands of Russian citizens of different towns were deprived of electricity and gas. These attacks of Kiev regime against Russian energy infrastructure means that they are violating their own obligations that they have assumed. And we inform the US, the UN, and the OEC about this. These are confirmation that the Kiev regime just cannot negotiate, and they are absolutely irresponsible. This is specific explanation of what is happening. Why is it important? Because everything that we hear that it is necessary to speak with the Kiev regime. But Kiev regime legally banned itself from having negotiations with us. And they cannot even implement obligations that they have assumed themselves. Speaking about the crimes of Kiev regime in other dimensions, on the 5th of April in Berezovka, Belgorod region, a Ukraine drone attacked a car, 3 people injured, including a 15-year-old teenager. In the town of Borky, 2 people were injured, including a 50-year-old teenager. No less than 11 people were injured in the Belgorod region. The 4th of April in DPR, a woman was killed in Kalinin district in Gorlovka. In Makeevka, 5th of April, an employee of a production company fish shop was killed. 2 her colleagues were injured. The next day, the drones attacked cars in central district of Gorlovka. A man killed, 5 people injured. The 7th of April, 2 more. And in the last week in DPR, 18 civilians were injured. In Bryansk region, in the 4th and 7th of April, 2 people killed, 1 injured. And we couldn't even believe it in 2025, but I'll underscore. It is the end of the first quarter of the 2025. In Suja, Kiev regime was selling the so-called passes for looting. A priest in Suja sold to journalists that the so-called looting passes were sold to those who lived in the region of Suma. They were presenting the so-called looters' tickets at checkpoints, and their cars could go to the occupied towns, where these people could choose a house to loot in them, and they would take everything that they could take. We have already told you about the platforms and social networks, and in marketplaces as well. There were things that are sold, the things that belong to the people who lived there before. The Ukrainian armed forces, the militants were there at the time when this happened. So it doesn't correspond with any logic of good and evil, with the human morale. The Kiev regime is doing business with this war, and it has been for a long time. There is the so-called volunteer organizations. I'm going to give it, the name of it. It's not a mistake. It's not a metaphor. No, it is its name, NAFO 69th Sniffing Brigade. And it has its English name, and it's just what it sounds like. They are proposing Europeans to go around the hostilities zone, and they all can also buy different things with foreign symbols. And these people would give cash donations for the needs of the AFU. This way, people could come to the so-called hunt. There are special places for this. I'm speaking about hunt for animals. All of this is under control, implemented according to the legislation, and the Kiev regime has its own safari right now. If you want to receive an original chevron, it will cost you 100 euros. If you want an inscription on a car, you'll pay 1,500 euros. For a banner, 2,500 euro. If you pay 10,000 euro, with instructors, you could have this so-called safari to the front line. In the world, by the 21st century, there are many perversions. There are some people that are absolutely inhumane, that don't know what is morality, and they are inventing such things to just have fun. And I couldn't just imagine such a perversion. When people are dying, when people are trying to survive, when the world, this responsible world, is trying to find true exit of this real drama. Someone is ready for a couple of thousand of euros or dollars to go there and to have fun looking at this land covered in blood. Since 2015 till 2022, Ukraine Nazis organized for their fellows in the so-called Nazi mind from the US and Western Europe this business. They could shoot against militia positions in Donbass. This way they will participate in the conflict. These feelings, these animal feelings, I don't want to speak ill of animals because these people are, the instincts of these people are even worse than animals have. The scale of moral degradation of these volunteers is being shown by their products that they're selling. For instance, a chevron on the topic of the Petorichka shop that was destroyed in Suja with the inscription, "Sorry, it's not working." Law enforcement organs are fixing all the testimonies of the civilians, of the criminals, of AFU militants. There are cases that are being started, investigations are being done concerning all the ill things that they did against the civilians in the Russian regions. This is the year of the 80 years victory on the Great Patriotic War. And this is a very important moment for those who are trying to rewrite history. They are so thrilled and they're taking great pains to rewrite history. And they're doing this systemically. Just remember, 10 years ago, the 9th of April, this same day of the 2015, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine adopted a package of laws on decommunization, including the recognition of the members of nationalist bands, including the OUN-UPA, Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and Ukrainian Insurgent Army. They called them the fighters for the independence of Ukraine. And now the Kiev junta continues this sophisticated policy of falsifying historic truth, eradicating truth about those who won and those who rid the world of the brown plague. These are Hitler henchmen who have on their hands the blood of thousands of women and children and the old, and they have been put on the equal footing of the veterans of the Great Patriotic War. The names of these punishers and collaborationists were included in the annual calendar of the commemorative events and anniversaries of Ukraine. The streets, the monuments were put to honor them. The march torches were organized to honor them, and all of this continues today. And the Western supervisors of the Kiev regime would not only turn a blind eye on the flouting of the memory about this war of the 20th century, but with their silence, they just bless the revival and the imposition of this all of this in the public consciousness of Ukraine. And all of this is now seen in Ukraine. European politicians just do not want or are not able to draw conclusions from the history lessons. In the 1930s, it was the same, and right now the neo-Nazis, at the time that was Nazis, they're trying to inflict a defeat on us. Maybe they're not using this terminology, but we understand what they're thinking. I would like to remind you that such endeavors are doomed to fail. Neo-Nazism has no future. Like 80 years ago, it will be defeated and eradicated.
Speaking of punishments for crimes of Ukrainian nationalists, Russian courts continue to issue verdicts to Ukrainian Nazis, 40 years of imprisonment in absentia. That is the sentence for mercenary from Uruguay. There were criminal cases initiated regarding mercenaries from Finland and Georgia, and both these persons are put on an international wanted list. This work does not end, not for a single second. We will brief you on it regularly. Extremely cynical and false reaction was made by Zelensky following a strike by Russian armed forces against a meeting point of commanders of Ukrainian units at Magellan restaurant in Kryvyi Rog. Zelensky was theatrically appalled by the lack of harsh response by the US following the propaganda fake that claimed that a Russian missile killed Ukrainian children. Washington insulted, or rather, he insulted Washington and rebuked him that he also called on to press on Russia. Allegedly, Russia is sowing death. Well, it is something that is related to his drug addiction or just a short reminder of himself. If he does wish to call a spade, we will do that. The footage shows that the armed forces of Russia made a strike against military goals, and it was a high-precision strike. According to the Russian MOD, up to 85 servicemen and foreign fighters were eliminated. Everything that could happen around this facility. Well, we were asked to call a spade, and that's what we are doing. This was caused by missile defense of Ukraine that was located close to residential houses, and these missile defense was used not professionally. This led to civilian casualties. Unfortunately, this was a tragic norm for Ukrainian Nazis. They sacrificed the life of their compatriots. This tactics of deploying snipers, equipment in residential areas, including close to children facilities, kindergartens, hospitals, clinics, that is something that they've been using all the time, and that's what we've been saying all the time. Meanwhile, we reveal even more facts of deliberate killings by Ukrainian fighters of innocent people, including women and elderly people. Unfortunately, we can say that the bloodshed of the Kursk citizens were just a large-scale phenomenon. According to eyewitness account that lived through a genuine hell, the white flag or any civil signs are perceived by these murderers from armed forces of Ukraine as a message, as a signal to kill defenseless people, regardless of whether they are Russians or Ukrainians. Let me also draw your attention that today, to the press center of the Russia Today agency, there will be a presentation of a report on war crimes. It was developed following eyewitness accounts by Maxim Grigoriev, the president of the International Civil Tribunal. We invite Russian and foreign media representatives to take part in this meeting, in this presentation. Indeed, this is a very difficult report. I would like to warn you straight away. It's very hard to hear that, to listen to that, to realize that, but you need to do that. And you need to do that not because it's part of the routine. You need to do that to realize the scale of inhumanity of the regime that has been set up by the West and has been developed by the West for many years. On the 4th and 5th of April, Kiev hosted a meeting of heads of general staffs of Ukraine, the UK and France to deploy a multinational peacekeeping contingent as part of something that I really like, the coalition of the willing. Basically, we're talking about modalities of a future French and British intervention to the Black Sea ports of Ukraine, primarily Odessa, and no decision was taken, which is frustrating for Zelensky. He expects that his allies will take specific steps to send troops, namely that these countries would start fighting on the side of the Ukrainian regime. We have repeatedly stated the repercussions that it could lead to. Let me once again recall that any foreign military presence in Ukraine, regardless of plans, flags, banners, and mandates, would be considered by Russia as a security threat to our country, and it has a direct risk of a direct clash with certain members of NATO and hence the whole alliance against our country. And certainly they need to cook up an ideology for all this mayhem, and new history textbooks are being developed in Ukraine. That is another drop in an ocean of an outright lie in Ukraine. Now they give history textbooks for high school students, and these textbooks are recommended by the Education Ministry of Ukraine. School children are to study the whole section dedicated to the ruling. Wait for it. You might think that this is a textbook about great Ukrainians, princesses and princes that were moving thousands of years ago towards England, and they married the local population. Not at all. Turns out that it wasn't the end of this craziness. There are some other options. Now high school students are presented with textbooks that have a whole section on the ruling of the reformist Zelensky. You know, some might write and some might say that there is this hero worshipping ideology, but I believe that that is not the right language, the right wording to describe it. I believe that around Zelensky, Ukraine and Western media is creating something of an occultic. This textbook presents its pseudo-achievements. What are these achievements? Well, for one, and I'm not joking, that is something that is stated in the textbooks that are adopted in Ukraine. This is not a sect, although we might use it for the Kiev regime. We're not talking about some sect representatives that publish these textbooks. These are officials in Ukraine that adopted these textbooks. One of the achievements of Zelensky is that he opened up the land market from the territory of Ukraine. This fertile land is being exported, and that's how they name it, the opening of the land market. Another achievement of his is a huge red tape and huge corruption around the big construction. You know that it was initiated back in 2020 in order to improve infrastructure and education, and turned out that it was all constructed at high price, and all too often it was called a big theft rather than big construction. And now it is something that school children should be proud of in Ukraine until they are not drafted. As for thousands of exterminated Ukrainians on the battlefield, economic disaster and outright robbery, nothing is said in this regard. The internet, social networks talk about that, as well as women, mothers and spouses of those who are being sent to this bloodshed. These facts once again confirm the relevance of the special military operation. As our leadership repeatedly stated, the goals of the special military operation will be definitely achieved. And another material that we saw in social media, it was something of a hype in a media platform. There is mounting evidence that the Kiev regime turned the war into a lucrative business. We talked about black band transplantology. It has reached record high numbers. Even before 2022, we have repeatedly raised this issue of black transplantologists, and there was a relevant journalist investigation by Russian journalists and Western ones. Now there is a number of other evidence, namely from Andrei Chemov, who is a prisoner from the 41st Infantry Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Turns out that he had a certificate from the Defense Ministry, from the Health Ministry of Canada's province of Ontario, stating that he would voluntarily donate his body, organs and tissues once he is dead. The fighters filled in these blanks, and the soldiers were told that this file, this paper, and you should be brave enough to comprehend it. This is a French medical certificate. Since this document is in French, which is one of the official languages of Ontario, Canada, and this medical French certificate would allow these soldiers of Ukraine to be treated in one of prestigious hospitals in France once they are wounded. Those drafted in Ukraine do not master French, and Kiev adopted this model. After a fighter dies, he will have his body organs removed, and probably Canadians would not know who was the donor of a new kidney or a heart. And these documents, and those who signed this document could be missing forever. Probably these documents are made legal in Ukraine. And that is why even a person is wounded but could be healed, it might turn out that for any soldier of Ukraine, this could be a lethal wounding and a lethal injury, because army doctors would search for some body organs and tissues in order to transplant it. Why should they treat such a soldier? It's more easy for them to be guided by the so-called French medical certificate. According to the ICRC, there are dozens of thousands of missing persons. It's not quite clear how many of them were donors for wealthy Canadians, but I believe that this question will be answered. On the 3rd and 4th of April, Brussels hosted a NATO foreign ministers meeting, which confirmed once again that the members of this military alliance do not leave attempts to militarize Europe, and they continue to hatch confrontation plans against our country. Alliance believes that Russia is a long-term threat and would remain as such even after the end of the Ukrainian conflict, as they prepare for an armed conflict against us. According to NATO, it could happen, and that's what they think, it could happen in 4 or 5 years' time. NATO plans to beef up their military expenditures. They actively call to reach the 3 or 5% of GDP for defense. A huge sum of money, over $1 trillion of USD, are spent for military purposes. Their economies are crippling. There is the destabilization of Europe. There is a myriad of problems in social sector. Does anybody have any questions left regarding the so-called peaceful nature of NATO? I don't think so. By the same token, we see the same case in the EU. Military expenditures were discussed at an informal session of the EU Council for Foreign Affairs. It took place on April 2nd and 3rd in Warsaw. There's a task of inflicting a strategic defense on the battlefield against us. They intend to spend over 800 billion euros in the upcoming 4 years, namely almost €1 trillion. In this spirit, NATO and EU is building its policy, and Ukraine is presented with this role of a victim in geopolitical standoff with Russia. The collective West seeks to continue supporting the Kiev regime. They should keep on fighting. Over the past 3 months, NATO have already allocated 20 billion euros to Ukraine. The alliance shows no aspiration to encourage their puppets to have constructive negotiations. On the other hand, NATO, by all forces, tries to fuel the conflict. At a meeting in Brussels, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte openly spoke in favor, and that is a quote by NATO SG. He wants the front line to move not from the east to the west, but the other way round. They wanted to move towards Urals, according to one of our songs by Vysotsky. Brussels believes that, actually, that is quite funny for me to say this coalition of the willing, some kind of obsessed maniacs. That's how I would call them. This is the most radical part of NATO, and they rushed to take part in the conflict in Ukraine. The UK and Macron's France convened summits, and they do not realize that their reckless actions could lead to the most large-scale conflict in Europe since World War II. But that is something that I've already raised previously. Speaking about France, we have repeatedly highlighted the violations by France of its international commitments, namely as a host country of UNESCO. It has repeatedly abused its status on a systemic basis and refuses to issue visas to Russians that are having business trips to UNESCO, or they delay the visa issuance, and by doing so, they undermine our participation in the meetings. Last week, we had another outrageous case of such neglect for the international law. They seek to undermine the work of our delegation at the 221st session of the Executive Board that took place on the 2nd to 17th of April. A visa was not issued in time to the Director for Multilateral Humanitarian Cooperation Department of the Russian Foreign Minister and Secretary of the Russian Commission for UNESCO, Alexander Alimov, and his trip was, well, he missed his trip. Once again, mind you, he didn't want to come to France. He wanted to come to the international organization hosted by France, and France has the relevant obligation to issue visas.
On the 6th of April in the Charles de Gaulle airport, happened something that cannot be explained, and we expect explanations from the French side, but we don't know how they're going to justify themselves. French border service, without explaining anything, detained an employee of the Russian Foreign Ministry, the member of the Russian official delegation, taking her phone and computer. The embassy of Russia immediately sent a consular worker to the airport, and our diplomat had to wait almost 7 hours to receive access to a colleague that has come as part of the official delegation to France. It is especially cynical because the French side has given a visit to our employee for this official trip. There were no obstacles, direct or indirect. There were no claims, and the French visa was given to this employee. And after that, this shameful performance was organized. The Russian embassy sent to Paris a protest note, and during conversation in Moscow, there was a protest given to the embassy of France in Moscow. And as a result, after all of this, our colleague could enter the country. But for 24 hours, just imagine it, she had to stay in the border zone of the airport, and we're not going to leave it without consequences. And when we're speaking about consequences, we want Paris to understand that the protest note is not a consequence. You're going to see what they are going to be. We're demanding from the Paris to implement the provisions of the Article 9 of the agreement between the government of the French Republic and the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization regarding the headquarters of UNESCO, its privileges and immunities on the territory of France since of 1954. According to this document, French authorities have to, without delay, provide visas for the members of official delegations and employees of the permanent missions of these international organizations. And we ask the Secretariat of UNESCO to do everything in its mandate to end this illegitimate discriminant practice that questions the capacity of France to implement the functions of the receiving state. I have my own idea about what happened. There is a new French ambassador that has come to Moscow. Maybe some people in the French foreign minister have played a dirty trick on him. That is why he starts his work with such a scandal. Well, unfortunately, this wing in France that suffers these colonial problems, it has history. This is historical fact. Paris has a great colonial legacy, and we have already been speaking about colonialism, French colonialism in other regions of the world, and there is a special section in our website regarding historical and legal responsibility of France for colonial and post-colonial period crimes. Paris has turned a whole continent in its resource base. French colonial policy was based on the ideas of racial and cultural, as they formulated it, supremacy. And the French thought that they were the bearers of higher meanings, as they called themselves. As for Algerians, the colonial administration was using abductions, extrajudicial executions, tortures, sexual violence. As a result, millions of people were killed. Political instability was the result of all of it, as well as underdeveloped economy and the damage to environment. Brutal crimes of colonial past are still being felt by the many peoples of the world. And one of the examples of the crimes of France of the colonial period is Algeria. This is a North African country that before the French colonists came was a very important country, and it restored its independence only in 1965 after an 8-year war that ended with the Avian Accords that gave Algeria freedom. Freedom after 132 French occupation. Algeria takes efforts progressively to show the facts of its fight against colonialism. There was a National Museum of Fighters against for Independence created in order to preserve the memory of colonial policy against Algerian people, about the resistance to colonial powers, and about its fight for independence. The information about the crimes committed by the French in Algeria is a part of their historical memory. Despite the number of people that were killed and tortured, the French government refused to accept the scale of the crimes that were committed during their colonial rule. They were using tortures, chemical weapons, they were using nuclear weapons. This rude behavior of official Paris made Algerian authorities to start preparing the draft law on criminalizing colonialism. And on 27th of March, they declared about this in the parliament of Algeria. So this will make the crimes during the colonial period of France are official, and it will demand compensations from the Paris for this, because all of this should be considered crimes against humanity, and those who made it are the Nazi executioners. And Russia supports Algeria in its striving to make French responsible for the crimes of colonial period and to receive just compensation for the past and current dire consequences of colonialism. And let's also speak about the inferior impunity in the West, and it led it to the fact that they have lost the sense of reality. The EU is destroying its own economy, refusing to use our energy resources. It is being in fever right now because of the increased tariffs on imports from the EU introduced by the US administration. They are not. They are promising to protect the interests of their own citizens and producers, but the prospects are very grim for the EU economy. In 4 years of presidency of the new administration, they can lose around €1 trillion, but they are giving the number of 750 billion euros. I wouldn't like to speak about the future losses, but about the losses that they have already suffered. The EU doesn't want to tell their own citizens how they have collapsed the economic prosperity that has been created in the EU countries. It was destroyed by the ideologists that wanted to break all the economic ties with our country. These results are not going to happen. They are already here. There was a wave of the so-called criticism or any attempts to analyze of what is going to happen to the EU with the new US tariffs. But they need to talk about this to their own citizens. I'm speaking about the regimes in the EU. What have they done when they refuse to use Russian energy resources? How has it affected the lives of citizens and the big European companies? And we already know all these figures, but the EU is silencing all of this. They are not telling how the massive anti-Russian sanctions affected the EU economy, and other reckless actions or sometimes very deliberate actions concerning our country. The brightest example is the next one. This is the factor that they refuse to use our energy resources. But this is all started with the response, with the counter-sanctions against them. They suffered great losses because of this in different sectors of the economy and production. trying to damage Russia, the EU started a destructive policy of refusing to use our energy. Let's speak about this. This suicidal policy didn't give the desired result concerning our country, but first of all, it was a blow for the EU, its member countries. It's no secret that the sustainable supplies of Russian energy on favorable conditions for decades were the basis of prosperity and competitiveness of European Union. But we need confirmation, some evidence. And I have the figures. The growth of the EU economy slowed down a lot in 2024, just 1%, and the GDP of Russia increased by 4.1%. The production, industrial production in the EU continues to fall in 2024 by 2.4%. Concerning separate member states of the EU, the situation is more dramatic. According to Eurostat, in 2024, the reduction of the Germany GDP, that used to be the driver of the EU economy, one of the most industrially developed countries of the association, was 0.2%, and the reduction of industrial production was even more, 4.5% comparing to the previous year. The chemical industry suffered the most, and the German automotive industry. In 2024, 4 million cars were produced in the German plants, and this is 25% fewer than before the pandemic. This is a true sign of deindustrialization. These figures are the true sign of it. The companies are being stopped, as well as their promising projects in the sphere of semiconductors and hydrogen. The production potential goes over the ocean. This is no surprise, because European companies have to pay for energy 2-3 times more than the Americans. And for gas, they have to pay almost 5 times more. This is just tip of the iceberg. If we count all the lost profit of the EU from their reckless anti-Russian policy in the sphere of energy, the scale of the problem will be horrible. According to experts, during the period of 2022-2024, they had to buy more expensive energy instead of the Russian energy resources, and the EU has lost around 50-60 billion euros because of this indirect influence. The energy, if energy crisis wasn't there, if it didn't happen, and we need to remember that the cause of it are the reckless actions of the EU and the West in general, the EU would continue to buy Russian energy on paying balanced prices, and they would save around 500 billion euros. And this sum is compared to the money that the EU officials are trying to find to preserve the competitiveness of the EU. It wouldn't be just money. It would be working money. According to experts, the accumulated losses of the GDP in the EU by 2024 are 3.8%, and since 2022 till 2024, this indicator is 2.4%. So we're speaking about the losses around 1.3 trillion euros. There are even higher estimates. But let's just take these ones that are verified. This is the price of anti-Russian policy of the EU. Yes. Russophobia costs a lot. And when someone in Brussels speaks about successes in their track of refusing to use Russian energy, they can remember all these figures. And first of all, this destructive EU policy affected common Europeans. Experts have calculated the EU citizens received 1.6 trillion euros revenue less in 2022-2024. This is a lot of money that could be used to solve real acute problems. For instance, fighting energy poverty and other problems as well. But if we're speaking about this, according to Euro Commission 2024, around 47 million Europeans could not afford to heat their houses enough. 47 million, what does it mean? 1 in 10 people. It's no surprise that the EU officials are doing all they can to support the grade of anti-Russian rhetoric. They have to press their citizens, making them tighten their belts, but it becomes even harder. Right now, Brussels has, because right now people have a lot of access to different information on the internet. However, Brussels continues its suicidal way, squandering hundreds of billions of euro to support Kiev regime, to militarize European economy, paying for the supply of expensive US energy resources. And we come to the question that we have already asked, whose interests they are protecting, being headed by the Ursula von der Leyen. On the 13th of April of 2015, the UN General Assembly has adopted the International Convention on the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, and the Russian Federation presented the draft of this convention in 1997 after painstaking work that sometimes seemed to bring up unbridgeable differences. Finally, we managed to create a text of this very important convention in fighting terrorism. The convention entered into force on the 7th of July 2007. It has become the first treaty that was adopted in the UN by the initiative of Russia. And for the first time, this anti-terrorist convention was created before any possible terrorist acts are being implemented, being committed with any terrorist acts with the use of nuclear materials or other radioactive substances. This is the first universal treaty that is dedicated to stop the use of terrorist acts with the massive destruction. This ensures that the anti-terrorist protection of peaceful and military aid and the prevention of terrorist acts with the use of improvised nuclear devices, and provides for inevitability of responsibility of people that commit such acts of nuclear terrorism on the basis of either extradite or prosecute. And the convention includes the mechanism to return radioactive materials, nuclear devices, and substances. On the 14th of April 2005, our president signed this convention, and in 2007, an instrument of ratification was given to the UN Secretary General. And Russia was the first nuclear state to do this. On the 2nd of April, the boost of Leo Tolstoy was opened in the Colombian Institute of Culture, and it was dedicated to celebrating 80 years of the Institute of Culture that was opened in November 1944, as well as to the 90 years of diplomatic relations between Russia and Colombia that were established on the 25th of June in 1935. On the eve of the 80th anniversary of the Great War, we remember the gesture of friendship of the Colombian people that in the years of hardship during the Great Patriotic War, they showed solidarity with the feats of Soviet soldiers and the home front workers. And they created the Institute of Colombian on Soviet Friendship, and this moral support was very important for our citizens while they were fighting Nazi invaders. Since 1991, this institution has the name of Leo Tolstoy. And now we're glad that this boost prepared by the great Russian sculptor Salvat Sherbakov will be decorating its halls. This initiative has become possible thanks to the project of Alley of Russian Glory. Different sculptures and memorials are being brought to different countries with the support of the government of Moscow, Russian Ministry of Culture, Federal Customs Service, and the embassy in Bogota, and as well as the honorary consulate of our consulate in Medellin.
We value the interest showed by many citizens of Colombia to Russian culture and language, and we thank all those who helped the establishment of this boost. And we look forward to further strengthening the friendship between our peoples and countries. And A few points on the victory and World War II. On the 7th and 8th of April, in the run-up to the anniversary date, the Mortal Regiment Foundation had a forum that brought together coordinators of the Mortal Regiment from 50 countries. It sought to consolidate efforts to preserve historical memory on fighting against Nazism and confronting falsification of history. The forum brought together prominent political activists, people of culture and art, patriotic public organizations, and in introductory remarks were given by Sergei Lavrov, and a few words on the 80th anniversary of the defeat of German unit of Königsberg and the seizing of Königsberg, namely Kaliningrad. It took place 80 years ago during East Prussian operation. It confirmed the high level of professionalism of Soviet strategists and showed the combat capability of the Red Army to fight using great skill and not great numbers. The then capital of Eastern Prussia was perceived as one of the unassailable fortresses of Third Reich, and it was prepared for long resistance even amid complete isolation. The defense was based on fortified posts. They withstood the test of time, and Germans called it the Iron Door. According to a veteran of the Great Patriotic War, Maria Zakharova, and I quote, 1 meter thick walls could fall only under our 305mm artillery. The Königsberg operation to seize the city was led by the commander of the 3rd Belarus Front, Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky, and it was a flash-like virtually, and it was completed within 3 days. The assault started on April 6 at 9 a.m. There was a barrage fire, infantry, tanks, and self-propelled vehicles. The second day, the city was encircled. On April 9th, Soviet troops eliminated the last hotbeds of resistance, and the Surrender Act was signed. The fall of Königsberg was a serious blow on German resistance. They lost the main navy base of Billau. The main forces of Samland and East Prussian units were destroyed. The assault of the fortress was celebrated by the highest grade of celebratory gunfire, 24 artillery salvos, and there was a Soviet medal established. It was established for the seizing of a fortress city, and I would like to convey my best regards to Annalena Baerbock, Foreign Minister of Germany. She said that she is proud of her granddad who fought on the side of Third Reich in Königsberg. The Resistance Day is celebrated on the 11th of April. They celebrate those who were fighting, and we value their memory. The citizens of France, Germany, Belgium, and other countries of Europe were participating. Several independence resistance organizations were set up. They collected intel. They undermined events of the occupied authorities. And according to historians, 40 to 50,000 Belgians participated there. 17,000 died. In Bulgaria, the core of this group was the Homeland Front. They coordinated guerrilla units nationwide, and they dealt a significant material damage to them, despite drastic change of Bulgarian political agenda and attempts to rewrite the outcomes of World War II. Anti-fascist organizations continue to defend a historical truth. Citizens stand against destroying monuments to Soviet warriors. They pay tribute to Nikola Varsplapa, Vladimir Zaimov, Alexander Piev, Angel Wittgenstein. This fight against occupants was international, and it had one goal: to defeat Hitler forces and to liberate territories that were seized and to destroy a hatred ideology. Over 180,000 compatriots participated in anti-fascist movement all around Europe. We're not talking about POWs that fled German concentration camps, but also innocent people that were put in slavery. We already talked about citizens that fought in France, Italy, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Greece. Let us talk about the Baltic states. In Latvia, some 125,000 Latvians and citizens of Latvian SSR participated in the movement, and units from Big Land helped these guerrilla movements. From Russia, from Belarus, in the Leningrad region in summer 1942, guerrilla regiment for Soviet Latvia was established. In February 1943, a guerrilla movement of Latvia was established. It was at the helm of the liberating fight. Guerrillas attacked small Hitler garrisons. They punished traitors during the war. In Lithuania, over 9,000 Soviet guerrilla fighters were fighting. They destroyed over 10,000 occupants. They destroyed dozens of Hitler military camps, and they destroyed railroads, communication lines. They were exceptionally brave. Does modern Lithuania remember the feat of a 20-year-old compatriot, Maria Melnikaite? She was seized by German butchers during a military operation. Hitler supporters tortured her in an inhumane way, and before execution, Maria proudly said, "I have been fighting and I'm dying for Soviet Lithuania. Why did you come here, you German dogs?" And for this bravery, and she was brave, very exceptionally brave, and for this resilience, she was awarded with the title of the Hero of the Soviet Union. The armed fight of guerrilla movement in the Soviet Union made a decisive contribution and brought closer the end of the most murderous war in global history. Over 300,000 Soviet guerrillas were awarded with orders and medals. 249 were awarded with the Hero of the Soviet Union. Two of them were awarded with the Hero of Soviet Union twice. The movement also brought on board members of Foreign Ministry, Nikolai Pevtsov and Vladimir Shestakov, as well as Igor Dementyev. They will always be remembered. On the 11th of April, the whole world celebrates the International Day of the prisoners of concentration camps. It was established in 1952 by the decision of UNESCO, and it marks the rebellion of POWs in Buchenwald on April 11th. As you know, Germany and occupied territories saw a wide network of concentration camps. Millions of prisoners from the Soviet Union and European countries were detained and treated in inhumane conditions, and then they were killed. Throughout the war, over 20 million persons from 30 countries of the world went through these camps. some 5 million prisoners were citizens of the Soviet Union. In 1946, at the Nuremberg trial, the International Tribunal recognized the concentration camps not only as a war crime, but a crime against humanity. The International Day symbolizes the resistance against all forms of violence, discrimination, and genocide, and it calls not to forget the history. Against this backdrop, we are appalled by the cynicism of the current German authorities. They take attempts to level down the importance of the victory as an act liberating Europe from fascism. They refuse to recognize crimes of Hitler supporters and their henchmen in the Soviet Union. As you know, German Foreign Ministry has recently, namely Annalena Baerbock, the granddaughter of a Nazi who's proud of her granddad. So the German Foreign Ministry sent instruction to regional and municipal authorities. Previously, they recommended not to invite official Russian representatives at memorable events. Now they have a significant change. The Foreign Ministry of Germany recommends to federal, local, regional organizations that will host memorable events to mark the 80th anniversary of this atrocious war, World War II. And our country sacrificed so much effort and lives. They suggest that not only Russian and Belarusian representatives shouldn't be invited, but they should be kicked out of these events. We have already commented on that. Come to think of it, it was made by Annalena Baerbock. She claims, and she wants to become the president of the UN General Assembly this year, which is an anniversary year for the victory over Nazism, and it is also an anniversary date for the United Nations. On the 13th of April 1945, the troops of the Third Ukrainian Front, under the command of Marshal Fyodor Tolbukhin, seized Vienna completely. Selfless actions were made by Soviet troops. They prevented the destruction of the city, as well as many valuable architectural buildings that Hitler supporters were ready to blow up. And thanks to the decision of the Soviet command, Vienna preserved its historical image. That is the way our granddads preserved the historical legacy. And now it's quite tricky for Russian diplomats to get there, given the difficulties posed by officials in Vienna. During the Vienna offensive from the 16th of March to the 15th of April 1945, thousands of Red Army soldiers died. The German command gave huge importance to the Vienna direction. It hoped to stop Soviet troops and to cut a separate peace with the UK and the US. However, Soviet troops defeated the South Army and reached the outskirts of Vienna. As they tried to prevent futile casualties and to preserve historical monuments of the city, the commandant of the Third Ukrainian Front asked the population of Vienna to help Soviet troops. On the 9th of April, the Soviet government published a statement confirming its decision to abide by the Moscow Declaration on Independence of Austria. By noon on April 13th, Vienna was completely cleansed of fascist troops, and to celebrate the victory, on 9 p.m. on the 13th of April, the capital of our homeland, Moscow, had a celebratory gunfire. To mark this victory, over 20 units were given the title Vienna units. Soviet government had a medal for the seizing of Vienna. There are 217 monuments and military burials in Austria. Under some treaties, Austria undertook to respect, preserve, and maintain the tombs of servicemen that fell in its territory. Every year, Russian diplomatic missions in Austria have memorial events that seek to preserve historical memory on the feet of Soviet soldiers. When the Russian delegation headed by Minister Lavrov came to Vienna, the Russian minister usually laid flowers to this monument. And a few important humanitarian points. On the 8th of April, the official website, Global Fact-Checking Network, was launched. We will definitely publish a link to this website. This is a global online platform that is accessible to all users. It brings together experts that debunk fake news. It is an information portal that accumulates topical research and debunking and investigation. In Moscow, there was a dialogue of regions. It was supported by the Foreign Ministry of Russia. It brought together over 1,000 of Russians and other participants from 60 countries of the world. The participants undertook the responsible fact-checking principles, and this is a global initiative that followed the endless flow of fake news and smear campaigns promoted by the West, the biased pseudo fact-checking activities. The forum saw the signing of a memorandum on establishing of the association, and it was supported by the TASS Information Agency. And congratulations to all of you on the results. We see this outcome, and there is a website in English, French and Russians, and the first investigations that are already published, for instance, on a new wave of deepfakes. High-profile materials were published, namely on something that has been closed recently, the Voice of America. There are voices calling to save this voice of propaganda, and we provide multiple examples of how this misleading entity was used, how it used fake news and fake toolbox that we have repeatedly mentioned, and now it is confirmed by American investigations. I highly recommend you to study it. We will publish the link. The goal of fact-checking analysis is to raise awareness about responsible contact with information, and any user might note that the key place in practical terms, in conceptual terms, is reserved to the code of responsible fact-checking. You can study it even now. All the links will be accessible in the text of the briefing. You can join the association using a link. Currently, the association comprises over 30 foreign journalists and investigators from 30 countries: Australia, Brazil, Spain, Nigeria, Pakistan, Indonesia, Singapore, and other countries. And certainly the association seeks to have an open dialogue with its users at the platform. And one of the American platforms is social networks. Any one of you could join the platform, could verify whether it's accurate. The work is ongoing not only website but also in social networks. I'm positive that this initiative will be developed and will be supported by all responsible users of the information process, primarily from countries of the global majority. Today, more than ever, a constructive approach is relevant. It is based on facts and responsible contact with regard to information. I wish the association every success. It is a hard job, but it is very relevant and important. Interestingly enough, in mid-20th century, in the US, the number of journalists and investigative journalists started to be perceived by ruling elites as threatening. They coined a term, conspiracy theorists, and they wanted to marginalize them.
For those who are true investigators, there are special platforms for communication in order for them to implement what they consider the deed of their life. In March 2024, on the federal territory called Syria, there was the World Youth Festival held. More than 20,000 delegates from 190 countries of the world participated in it. And we could see the progress of forming a proactive international youth movement that advocates just world order development of equal international cooperation based on mutually respectful partnership. The priorities of the Directorate of the World Youth Festival after the festival are the expansion and strengthening of international youth community, preserving the legacy of the festival, as well as the support of implementing initiative of Russian and foreign citizens, as well as the organizations that are developing international youth cooperation. In order to present cutting-edge work of Russian youth ecosystem, there are several events that are being planned for 14th, 18th of April in the UN headquarters in New York. On the 17th of April, on the platform of the UN General Staff, in the context of the Economic and Social Council Youth Forum, the session called Russia is the Showcase of Leading Youth Work Standards is going to be held. The best practices will be presented by the Directorate of the World Youth Festival, Rosmolodozh, Russian Foreign Ministry, Russian community called Znanie, the Ministry of Science and Higher Education of Russia, the Chamber of Young Legislators, and Russian delegation is going to include representatives of the federal organs of executive authorities, heads and members of civil society organizations and platforms, representatives of scientific and student communities, international associations, around 30 people. Since 14 till 18 April, in the context of this youth forum of the Economic and Social Council of the UN, there's also going to be an exhibition held. It is called At the Heart of the Arctic Circle. This exposition is organized by the Directorate of the World Youth Forum with the support of Nuclear Energy Corporation Rosatom, with the support of our ministry and our permanent mission in New York. And it will be dedicated to the 80 years of nuclear industry in Russia. And I'm ready to answer your questions. Международная жизнь, international life, you are here. Do you have any questions? Yes, we have a question, but you have already answered it in the first part. On the weekend, there was a Chief of Staff meeting. Big Asia, are you here? Yes, we're here. We have one question. At the end of March in Tokyo, there was a trilateral meeting of the Japan, China, and South Korea, and Peking and Seoul are going to renew their negotiations on the trilateral trade zone that stopped 6 years ago. What are our assessments about the prospects of strengthening trade and economic cooperation between three states, given the trade and economic pressure of the U.S.? Russia is not part of this dialogue, not part of this trilateral dialogue. That is why we cannot give any assessments of the prospects of this format in the trade and economy sphere, especially speaking about the trilateral free trade zone. Of course, we welcome all the efforts that enforce stability and economic growth and prosperity in Northeast Asia. And all of this can be ensured only through a wide inclusion of all the countries of the region into this dialogue on an equal footing without any division lines. without any recommendations from outside the region how this region should live. If this is the work that is being done there, then we welcome such efforts. But once again, we cannot give an assessment, any evaluation, because we are not part of this format. They have their own agenda, and it is unacceptable for us to give any evaluation. Xinhua, are you here? Yes, we're here. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We're glad to welcome you today. We have the next question. Recently, the U.S. introduced the so-called mirror tariffs for all their partners, introducing them against more than 180 countries and regions of the world, including some economies that are recognized by the UN as the less developed, and even uninhabited islands where only seals and penguins live. WTO forecast that such actions of the US could lead to the reduction of the volume of the world trade of products in this year by 1%. How can you comment on that? According to you, what are the principles? What is the spirit that should we follow in order to ensure healthy development of the world trade and global economy? Well, I would like to proceed from your own question and to ask another one. Another question. Do not consider me being rude, but I would like to ask everyone who is now commenting without full understanding, commenting the introduction of tariffs against uninhabited islands where only seals and penguins live. Where were you before all these decades when the US was treating this way the countries where people live? They were treating these countries and places as places where only seals and penguins live. Many representatives of the U.S. elites treat seals and penguins, treat people as if they were seals and penguins, introducing these illegitimate, illegal, sometimes even criminal sanctions, starting trade wars. I can speak a lot about the measures that were taken against our country. I can speak even more about the measures against Cuba. The period was longer, of course. I can speak about sophisticated measures taken against China. But I would like to remind today about the horrible measures against Syria. Because of the Westerners, it was under the fire of an internal standoff fighting international terrorism for many years, and it was suffering an acute lack of medicine, medical equipment during the pandemic, and there were sanctions introduced against the country and against its people, programs created, blockades introduced. That is what we should start with. It's not the time right now to wake up. We should have done it even longer before. The measures were taken by Washington against the EU directly and indirectly, and this resulted in the collapse of the EU economy. Where was the EU at the time? Now they are concerned by the tariffs. But before this, it was Biden who was speaking proudly how he made the Brussels and the EU bureaucracy and the member countries of the EU to introduce sanctions against Russia, understanding that there will be counter-sanctions against the EU introduced by us. And no one wants to remember it. No one wants to pay attention to it, but the countries of the world majority were speaking about this. But many were just turning a blind eye to it. That is why we need to have a wider perspective. It was Hemingway who said that we need to know that the bell tolls for everyone, not only for regions that are very far away, but if it starts tolling, we need to start thinking, because in the future it can affect your own country, your economy. And we have been speaking long about this, and we were warning many countries. Russia is the biggest exporter and responsible participant of multilateral trade system, and we're interested in honest and open trade relations. Everyone knows very well our position. That is why our country is against any unilateral restrictions in trade as sanctions, illegitimate sanctions, politicized or the so-called environmental demands, other ways of dishonest competence that are negatively affecting the global trade, and oppose the obligations that were assumed by the countries voluntarily in the context of the relevant structures and organizations. In order to ensure the healthy development of the world economy, we need to work on the basis of the principles of non-discrimination, transparency, and mutual consideration of interests. Media Corporation of China, yes, we're here. You have already answered to our question, but I would like to focus on the measures that are taken by the US against China. I'm speaking about trade wars. The EU threatened that before the 8th of April, China is not going to cancel the 34% increase of tariffs on the American products. On the 9th of April, Washington is going to impose a 50% tariff on Chinese products. The US will stop any negotiations with China and start consultations with other interested states. What can you say about the actions of the US against China and the consequences? Well, the tariff decisions of the President of the US violate the fundamental rule of the WTO, and it has shown that Washington doesn't seem itself binded by the norms of international trade law. The legal procedure of WTO, there's a special legal procedure in this World Trade Organization. It provides for the cases of unilateral tariff increase. But the US decided to start this unilateral tariff protectionism, trying to protect Russian, American companies in order to bring production of the products to their own territory. If we're speaking about the US economy, the internal affairs, speaking about the critical situation in the US, these are their words. They are saying that the country is in a critical situation. Many politicians are speaking about this. They're characterizing the state of the US economy very specifically. They're speaking about the public debt, the loss of the economic growth, and they are trying to do something about this. They're trying to undo what was done during the previous decades by their predecessors. This way, tariffs are used by the White House to make other countries take their conditions. When analysts are evaluating this, they're saying that these are hidden measures of economic pressure. But they are not hidden, actually. And given the tariff war between the US and China, we would like to say that all of these affects the global economy, and it can affect many world processes. We're also concerned by it because we're speaking about the biggest economies of the world, and one of them is the Chinese economy, our trade partner for many years, and we are following the situation. We're going to analyze all the possible consequences and take measures to minimize possible damage for our country. The President of the Russian Federation has taken the course to strengthen strategic interaction with the People's Republic of China. This is part of our concept of foreign policy that was adopted on the 31st of March 2023. And I think that this course concerns includes our strengthening of our cooperation in all these spheres, and it was confirmed many times. Thank you very much. Let's proceed. Rita, are you here? Yes, hello. Our today's question concerns Iranian nuclear program. In Moscow, yesterday there was the meeting of Russia and Iranian representatives, and there was also a meeting between the US and Iran in Oman. In this regard, we would like to ask about the settlement of this problem. What are the specific details of Russia's position in this sphere? What are the specific proposals of Moscow in this regard for the political and diplomatic solution of this problem? You know, our position does its best for making the settlement possible. To reach it through political and diplomatic means, there are many confirmations. I can give you the chronology over the recent months. The 14th of March, Sergei Rybkov participated in the meeting of the vice foreign ministers on the topic of the JCPOA and the interaction. First of all, they were speaking about the situation with the Iranian nuclear program. Well, first of all, I'm speaking about the JCPOA. There is a detailed material about this on our website. As a result of the consultations, a statement was published of this China-Iran-Russia meeting. You can see our approaches there. On the 2nd of April, there was the meeting of the Vice Foreign Minister Sergei Rybkov and the Vice Minister of Iran on political issues. They were speaking about the same problem, as well as the consultations that were held yesterday, on the 8th of April, on the expert level in Moscow. We have a position, but we're also implementing this position in different formats. I'll underscore that our position is consistent. I have mentioned the documents, and they confirm it. Of course, we are tired of the threats against Iran, and it also means that we do not understand why this topic that has already found a diplomatic way out, that is being viewed as a pretext for aggression. We understand that we cannot pave the way to peace with bombings, and there is an issue that is being raised. There is even, we can say, a request to find effective negotiation solutions to move away from this dangerous line and to establish long-term settlement. What is the basis of our approach to this problem? Well, all the ideas against the Iranian nuclear problem should be based on security, on ensuring verification, on the balance of interests, moving step by step, implementing the arrangements, and this way forming trust towards each other. The UN Security Council Resolution 2231 is being violated, and the US and the Europeans show themselves as someone who is not ready and not capable to negotiate, and this should be rectified. Nuclear program of Iran has been verified for 25 years, very painstakingly. This is not their fault. This is that the JCPOA that managed in a very short time managed to solve all the issues, just lost its ability to do that. Tehran cannot be responsible for illegal actions of those who have made erroneous forecasts and undermined the arrangements that was one of the biggest achievements of the international diplomacy and resulted in the reduction of the scale of verification of the IAEA in Iran.
Overall, the way our Western colleagues deal with this issue raises questions as to their genuine intentions. We do hope that the reasonable approach will prevail and they will be able to opt for a constructive discussion on possible modalities of negotiated solutions. We have a framework, including the models that were used during the development of the JCPOA. Russia made a significant contribution at all stages, and that is universally recognized. Today, our country does its best for the settlement to be possible only by means of diplomacy. Thanks a lot. And certainly all the links to the materials that I've mentioned will be published in the text of the briefing. Tavia TV and radio channel. Hello, Madam Zakharova. You have already answered our question in detail. Thank you. Anadolu News Agency. Hello, Madam Zakharova. Anadolu News Agency. We have one question today. Does Sergei Lavrov plan to have contacts at the Antalya Diplomatic Forum on Ukrainian settlement? Foreign Minister of Ukraine is intending to attend the forum. Will they have a meeting? First, the schedule of meetings of Minister Lavrov is being developed on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomatic Forum. Second of all, there will be a number of meetings, that's for sure. Third, it's important to separate these two things. Certainly, Ukrainian file will be discussed at every meeting. Do we plan to have a separate individual meeting solely on this matter? I do not have such information. Do you have any other questions? Will he have a meeting with the Foreign Minister of Ukraine? We didn't have a request on the Ukrainian side. I can say in preliminary terms that the meeting with the host country is being prepared, namely the head of the Foreign Minister of Turkey, and a host of heads of foreign ministries of various states, and that will attend this conference. Everything is being just developed and drafted. We will brief you in more detail a little bit later. The Moscow Post. Hello, we have one question today. This topic has been raised in part. How does the decision of the Trump administration to impose tariffs can affect relations with the EU and the CIS? Do your colleagues have preliminary assessments? I believe that it's too early to talk about specifics. In more broad terms, I can say that these developments reaffirmed the need to further develop integration within the EAEU and the CIS. This is a strong message, a signal to step up our cooperation and galvanize our interaction on specific sectors, and we will develop specific steps to implement this approach. Thank you. Lenta.ru. Hello, we're here with us, and we have one question. Given tension between the US and Iran, as well as statements by the UN representative Stefan Dujarric on the need for the third party to mediate, can Russia, that previously reaffirmed its readiness to help bring about a solution, could be a mediator? And what specific steps does Russia intend to take to help negotiating process. First, we have repeatedly noted our readiness to provide assistance to resolve the situation that needs to ease tensions. And second of all, we welcome any context that could lead to de-escalation around Iran. Third, I have just listed contexts over the past month or a month and a half, namely our efforts in this area. Thank you. Verelk. Hello, Madam Zakharova. I have 3 questions today. As far as I know, from the 30th of June, there's a change for the entry to Russia. For members of the EAEU, they will have to file a notice that 72 hours in advance. Doesn't it violate the norms of the EAEU on the free movement of labor? And isn't it a concealed form of visa regime for the EAEU countries? First of all, I would like to note that all measures in migration taken in Russia are aimed at ensuring security and law and order, or to simplify the relevant procedures. Secondly, you have mentioned this experiment, namely the registration of foreign citizens in the common in the United system using a special mobile app. Naturally, we're not talking about introducing a visa regime. As for the details of this experiment, I kindly ask you to ask your question to the Ministry of Interior. If you have any specific question, we would be happy to work with our colleagues. All the initiatives in Russia regarding migration issues are carefully analyzed to see whether they meet the international obligations of our country, including within the EAEU. Thank you. And the second question. Tensions run high on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There is misleading information on shellings. Azerbaijan make strikes on the border territories of Armenia. Many experts believe that that is a run-up to a new wave of escalation. Certainly, we follow the situation in the Armenian-Azerbaijan border area. We saw media reports that you've mentioned. We confirm our call to Baku and Yerevan to exercise restraint and to de-escalate the situation, to avoid any actions that could make the matters worse. All the issues should be resolved by peaceful, political, diplomatic means. For our part, we are ready to provide assistance to our partners to overcome contradictions, to finally sign a peace treaty, to unblock transport and economic communications, to delimit border, to address humanitarian issues in line with the trilateral agreements between leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. Last but not least, Madam Zakharova, a question on Consul General in Sunik. Do you have any specifics? When will it be opened? We have specifics, and details are versatile. I will get back to the timeline. But first of all, I would like to tell you about the general context. We believe that expansion of Russian presence at strategic, importantly, region of the south of Armenia meets long-term interests of Russia and Armenia. Given traditional goals addressed by consular facilities of Russia abroad, this step could give a significant impetus to deepening trade, investment, scientific, educational, cultural, and humanitarian cooperation. It could develop win-win ties of this territory with Russian regions, advancing economic agenda between our countries. In Sunik is especially important within the EAEU that you've mentioned, given the recent ratification by Iran that borders this Armenian region of the free trade agreement with the Union. Hence, this aspect should be taken into account, and this will be a safety net for a dynamic, peaceful, and safe development of the Sunnik region. We're happy to note useful efforts of the advanced team of Russian diplomats to bring about conditions for the establishment of the Consulate General. Their versatile efforts in the region is praised by the population. The work of this team and the establishment
подробно обсуждались сторонами, а именно министрами иностранных дел России и Армении 21 января в Москве в ходе консультации заместителя министра России и его армянского коллеги. — 20 марта эта тема поднималась. И мы рассчитываем, вот теперь уже к долгожданным срокам я перехожу, что к маю мы сможем выйти на конкретные договоренности по срокам открытия нашей консульской точки.
Спасибо большое.
Вам спасибо. С нами телеканал Рудав. Так, Рудав не слышу. Вернемся позже. С нами ли автор И?
Здравствуйте, Мария Владимировна.
Да,
Руслан,
здравствуйте.
автор И. У нас к вам сегодня два вопроса. В парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ отдельные лица прям призывают Россию вернуться, но ставят достаточно ультимативные условия заплатить членские взносы, которые вот Россия не присутствовала со дня начала СВО на Украине. Как вы могли бы прокомментировать, готова ли Россия возобновить участие в работе этой ассамблеи и приемлемы те указанные вот требования?
Ну, я хотела бы обратить ваше внимание, что вопросы участия российской парламентской делегации в работе парламентской же ассамблеи ОБСЕ относятся к компетенции Федерального собрания Российской Федерации. Также напомню, что решение о приостановке участия в парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ было оформлено совместным заявлением Палат Федерального собрания нашей страны от 3 июля 2024 года. Там полностью четко обозначены причины подобного решения. Думаю, что ответ на этот вопрос вам стоит поискать в этом заявлении. Ну и тем более это не совсем наша компетенция.
Спасибо большое. И второй вопрос. Дональд Трамп категорически отказывается, как мы знаем, отменять пошлины. Его администрация...
От каких пошлин?
Торговые пошлины, которые он ввел.
Отказывается?
Отказывается говорить о том, отказывается отменять торговые пошлины.
Отменять. Все, я поняла.
Да, а его администрация говорит, отказывается еще говорить о том, что начались паника на фондовых рынках, что началась рецессия. Они тоже говорят, что все в порядке, скоро все это уляжется. И наш вопрос, повлияло ли это на российскую экономику, на российские интересы? И в ближайшей перспективе повлияет ли это и как?
Ну, я уже частично ответила на этот вопрос, что подобные
consistently calling to strict respect of sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria, we have been guided by a principled approach, and we welcome the achieved arrangements to return the northeast Syria to the Syrian state, taking into account legitimate rights and interests of all ethnic and religious groups living in this region. We assume that the fate of the country shall be shaped by Syrians within a broad all-national dialogue without any interference from abroad. We believe that the conclusion of this agreement between Syrian authorities and the leadership of the Syrian Democratic Forces is an important step towards rebuilding the unity of Syria and strengthening its security and stability. We understand that ensuring practical implementation of these arrangements would be linked to various problems of various nature, and it would be hard to implement them. To overcome these difficulties, the parties should be constructive and should be ready to have compromises. Hopefully, they will do this.
My second question is that we have observed an initiative aimed at PKK disarmament and resolving Kurdish issue in Turkey. Since Moscow is considered to have good relations with Turkey, have you encouraged them to address these issues? What outcomes do you hope from this initiative to be?
The Republic of Turkey is our important neighbor and partner, as you know. That is why what happens there is of concern to us, and we believe that it is their sovereign affairs. We respect the right of Ankara to shape independently the way they resolve the domestic situation. The Russian position remains unchanged, and it reflects our principled view that we need to build honest bilateral relations. We do hope that Turkish authorities will take efforts that will achieve inter-ethnic accord and will stabilize the security situation both in Turkey and outside Turkey.
This is my last question. Tensions between Iran and US have been intensifying, with Tehran stating that they will not reach any agreement with Washington as long as they threaten military actions in the absence of an agreement. How do you view the situation between them? And from Moscow's perspective, how could this issue to be solved?
I do hope that I have commented on the Iranian nuclear program today repeatedly, and I have commented on the relation between Iran and the international community, the illegitimate pressure exerted upon Iran. I would just add to that first of all, we need to highlight and once again repeat that it is illegitimate and unacceptable for the enemies of Iran to use military means to achieve their goals. Lately, we've heard messages and signals on prospects of diplomatic settlement, and I believe that they should be taken into account. We note that any context that could lead to de-escalation around Iran should be welcomed. As for what specific things Russia does, I've already named them, a number of consultations in bilateral, trilateral format at the level of Deputy Foreign Minister, at the level of experts over the past 6 weeks. Thank you.
For your time. Thanks for your
Спасибо
answers.
большое.
Have a nice day.
Спасибо вам тоже.
Have a nice day, you too. Since there are no further questions, goodbye to you. See you next time. All the best, and I wish you all the best.
Да, вижу.
What about Голос Отечества? Could you please introduce yourself? Голос Отечества, internet media source. I have the following question. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov congratulated the editor-in-chief of RT and Russia Today, Margarita Simonyan, and wished her happy birthday. Russia is quite friendly towards people that had American education. Would it undermine the prosperity and security of Russia in the future? That is quite a provocative question, I should say. Do you think that, do you have any doubts regarding the civic position and professionalism of editor-in-chief of RT? Neither have we.
But there is a threat to national security, and it exists. Why are you asking this question? In what context? Referring to what? She's the editor-in-chief of the Russian TV channel. She's a person that has very bright civil position, and it's her anniversary. She is very, very highly professional and has a very, very well-known civil position. Knowing the context and the history of this TV channel and the editor-in-chief, that is why there was a congratulation on her birthday. How can you link this to national security? Can you explain it to me? You don't have any questions to the editor-in-chief, Margarita Simonyan, so you don't feel any threat. Then why do you link these things when you say yourself that you do not see any connection? She studied abroad in an American program. Maybe something can change, and this is unsafe. I think we have exceeded the limits of the so-called common sense, speaking about all of this. Not regarding the context of this issue, but I think that we should formulate everything that we're speaking about based on the presumption of guilt, facts. You could give some arguments, but the link that you have made is not being confirmed by you. It's absolutely unacceptable, according to me. That is why I don't have any desire to keep talking about this. I didn't stop it right away because I thought maybe I didn't hear it well. maybe there is going to be some explanation, but if you don't going to give me any explanation why you ask such questions, such provocational slogans with a question mark, why are you doing this? Well, I can explain it. There is law 481 fighting against national threat when people were studying abroad. And what it has to do with this situation? I think you have answered your own question. You don't have any questions. And we should have started with this. Thank you very much. Have a good day.